So the Weilong line of cubes has been used by many professional speedcubers throughout cubing history. And another year, another Weilong release. And this year, it's the Weilong V10. And it's a pretty good addition to the Weilong line, and is a cube that I would say has main potential. So, let's talk about this cube. Hey guys, it's KADtheCuber, and I make YouTube videos about plastic toys. So, to get the miscellaneous stuff out the way, this cube has 4 versions, and this is the second highest version with UV, ball core, and with springs, so no maglev. So let's talk about the feel of this cube. It has a pretty soft and maybe slightly crunchy feeling. And I would also say that it has a pretty hollow feeling as well. Now, I've watched the Cubicles video on this cube where many of the members give their opinion of this cube, and what some of them might say is that it's pretty similar to the RS3 and V5. In my opinion, it's not that much similar. I think there are some differences like the hollow feeling, maybe the lightness of the turns as well. The turns are lighter on this cube. And I'll also say the hollowness of this cube. If I were to give you a cube that I think this is similar to, I would actually say the Dian Guhong Pro. So maybe not even a Weilong. And I think part of it might be from the plastic, but also the hollow feeling of the cube. And let's talk about the build of this cube actually, because what people in the cubicle might say is that this cube is pretty blocky. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a very blocky cube. I think an example of a blocky cube would be something like the Swift block, but I wouldn't necessarily say this is a very blocky cube. I think one theory I have is that maybe someone in the cubicle kind of maybe set it up to where it is blocky, and that's why many of the people there say it is, but maybe just a theory. I will say I didn't spend an excessive amount of time messing with the tensions, but on the topic of tensions, there's good news that this has an updated tensioning system. And finally, after years of the dual adjustment system, it has now been taken away and has been replaced with a new tensioning system, close to one of the best in the market, or maybe one of the best. I think, in my opinion, one of the best tensioning systems is the Tornado V3, and what that cube has that this one doesn't is just the option for hand adjustment. And so with this cube, you're kind of limited to using the tool that this cube comes with, which is not a huge deal though. I personally have not messed around with the tensions. I probably will in the future, and it's probably a reason to why I find this cube pretty fast and maybe slightly flimsy. So yeah, like the Weilong V9, this cube does not have adjustable magnets, which I don't think is a big deal. When I'm doing solves, I don't feel like there's any problem with the magnet strength. So I think for me, and maybe some of you guys, the lack of adjustable magnets isn't a huge deal. So this cube does have the ball core, so it has the magnets on the corner pieces and also repelling magnets on the edge pieces. And if you guys have watched my previous videos, I wasn't very in support of the repelling edge magnets. I felt as if it was kind of making the turns a bit too inconsistent, but it's less so in this cube. And so I don't feel like the turns are overly inconsistent like the previous Weilong cubes, including the Super Weilong and the Weilong V9. If it did have a similar inconsistent feeling, I might like this cube a bit less. Yeah, good thing it doesn't have too much of an inconsistent feeling from the repelling magnets. Now, in regards to my setup, at first I lubed it with FC-Com and Angstrom Dignitas. And then what I found was that the FC-Com kind of made it a bit too fast, so I wiped it out a bit, tried to see if it improved after wiping it. Turns out it was still pretty fast, so I wiped more lube out. And what I did was just lube it with only Angstrom Gravitas, but forgetting the FC-Com, and that's how it is kind of right now. And I've been able to get some pretty good times with this cube, and I've been able to get as low as an 8.35 average of 100, which is one of my best average of 100s. So that's a pretty good sign for how this cube works for me. If I were to express one downfall, I think sometimes I do mess up. Reasons for that could be because of the lightness of this cube. I do think a downside of the hollow feeling that this cube has is that this cube doesn't feel like super solid compared to the Weilong V9 or maybe something like the RS3 and V5. It does feel like a semi-hollow cube. Maybe or maybe not, it might take away from the premium feeling of this cube. That's not to say that this cube is necessarily not premium, but if I were to reword it, maybe just not very solid. But I will say that I am performing pretty well in this cube. I don't know how well I would perform in competition, but overall, I think just for at-home practice, so far it's doing me pretty good justice. If I didn't have this cube, I would probably use the RS3M V5, and so the RS3M V5 is probably the cube that is going against the Weilong V10 right now for me. So I will have to spend a bit more time with the Weilong V10, and chances are this cube is going to become my main. In regards to how this cube fits into the Weilong line, for those who might think that it doesn't really make sense, I will say it's not that much of a surprise. If we think about the previous Weilong cubes, if we start from the Weilong WRM, the difference between the Weilong WRM and the WRM 2020 is a pretty significant jump. The cubes were very different. Well, if we go to the 2021 to the Weilong V9, it's a pretty big jump. And so the Weilong line of cubes recently has been pretty jumpy, if you will. And so if we compare this to the Weilong V9, it is pretty different. It does resemble more the Weilong V9 Special Edition than the regular V9. But I wouldn't necessarily say it's nonsensical, but I do think this is a pretty good addition to the Weilong line. And this cube might be something that professional speedcubers might use. I know Luke Garrett has been considering this as a main, and so is Dylan Miller, but he also thinks that this cube may or may not be a bit too light. In terms of which edition you should get, since I do have the spring edition, this is a pretty good cube for me, but I wouldn't necessarily say that the maglev version isn't worse. One thing I would recommend is watching the CubeCool's video on the different versions. I think some of them do prefer the spring version, but that's something to consider. Hey guys, it's Classic Setup KADtheCuber here, and I do now have a maglev WRM V10 Angstrom setup, and what I will say about this is that it's not the most suitable cube for me. I think I like my spring version a bit more, and part of it is because of the glidey feeling, and I don't know if it is the fault of the lubes or if it's the maglev. So I would still recommend that you look at other videos regarding the maglev or the spring version and kind of basing your opinion on that. But yeah, that is my opinion on the Weilong V10, potentially a main, and potentially a cube that professional speedcubers might move on to. So that's the Weilong V10, and if you're interested in buying this cube, you can check out the link in the description. And if you buy anything from the Cubicle, I encourage you guys to use a discount code KADtheCuber at checkout for 5% off your order. So yeah, that's the Weilong V10. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram at KADtheCuber. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.
Bye.